Rumors of sabotage against Lewis Hamilton. Stay until the end only if you want to see the newly leaked contract that reveals some of the advantages Charles Leclerc's engine has over Hamilton's. The moment Lewis Hamilton's team radio went dead for exactly 37 seconds, the world barely blinked. Commentators glossed over it as interference. Social media fed on speculation. Fans blamed a faulty switch or a random glitch in the hundreds of data channels pulsing between car and pit wall. But inside that brief and eerie silence, something far more unsettling had occurred. The absence of feedback, the sudden isolation, wasn't technological failure, it was surgical intent. Behind the blinking lights and telemetry readouts, behind the wall of engineers glued to their monitors, someone had made a choice. It wasn't negligence. It was orchestration. A decision wrapped in plausible deniability. And Hamilton, trapped inside a 220 miles per hour missile, in the heat of battle, felt the truth wash over him not with rage, but with recognition. He'd seen this before. Just never from the inside. He had stepped into Ferrari not as a racer seeking glory, but as a symbol, a figurehead, a final act in a career filled with defiance and domination. The most decorated driver in the sport's history had traded the familiarity of Mercedes for the mythos of Maranello. The headlines called it destiny. The press hailed it as history in motion. And for a moment, it all looked real. The cameras caught him laughing with mechanics, dressed in Ferrari red. He posed beside the iconic prancing horse, engines firing behind him like an orchestra warming up for a new symphony. It was a perfect narrative, until it began to rot. What Hamilton hadn't anticipated was that he hadn't been recruited to lead Ferrari's revival. He had been acquired to distract from its decay. From the very start, the signs were subtle. A postponed simulator session here. A technical debrief that felt more like a performance than a discussion. Adjustments made to the car without his consent. Setup changes that didn't appear in the briefings. And then came the whispers. Conversations would abruptly stop when he entered a room. Data that had once flowed freely at Mercedes was now filtered, sanitized, delayed. The collaboration he expected turned into choreography, his presence reduced to an image rather than an influence. At first, he thought it was just transition friction. New systems, new people. But then came the silence. And everything changed. 37 seconds of nothing. No voice from the pit wall. No updates on tire wear. No response to direct questions. Nothing. Just the violent roar of the V6 engine and the cold realization that he was entirely alone. It happened not on a backmarker lap, not during a safety car lull, but during a critical pit strategy window, at the very point where milliseconds define race trajectories. Hamilton had asked a direct question about tire degradation. No one answered. The void wasn't accidental. It was tactical. A ghost in the machine, placed by hands wearing team colors. When communication finally resumed, the voice on the other end was hollow, flat, and unfamiliar. Not his usual race engineer. Not even someone he recognized. Just a placeholder delivering generic guidance 2 laps too late. By then, the damage had been done. Hamilton's tires had fallen off a cliff. He lost position to his teammate, to 2 midfielders, and the podium was gone. But the real damage wasn't to his result, it was to his trust. That night, in a quiet hotel suite outside the circuit perimeter, Hamilton pored over the race data. He requested telemetry logs, radio transcripts, pit wall audio. He demanded access to team strategy files. But every request was either delayed, redirected, or denied. Excuses layered on top of each other. Encryption errors. We're still compiling it. We'll send it by morning. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became radio silence. Again. That was when he knew he hadn't joined Ferrari as a partner. He had walked into a machine that had already decided what his role would be. Not to build. Not to lead. But to absorb the blame, to draw the spotlight, to provide the illusion of evolution while the old power dynamics remained untouched beneath the surface. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Strategy simulations from race weekends showed deviations that hadn't been mentioned in meetings. Pittsburgh lane communication protocols had been altered, with a separate shadow channel reserved for executive overrides. Engineers he trusted at the start of the season had stopped speaking freely. Several had been reassigned to remote duties. One quietly resigned. Another, who had worked with him at Mercedes, warned him in cryptic terms to watch the rearview mirror, even when you're parked. And still, the public narrative remained pristine. Ferrari's PR engine spun every race into poetry. If Hamilton underperformed, it was explained as adaptation to new systems. If he raised questions, he was called passionately involved. If he lost out to his teammate, the data was spun in 1,000 ways to frame it as a team victory. But behind the scenes, the scaffolding was cracking. Team briefings became tense. Meetings were cut short. Horner, now an unexpected player inside Ferrari's strategic council, appeared at circuits without announcing his presence. His influence spread like wildfire, whispering new hierarchies into existence, promoting voices Hamilton had never heard, shifting decision-making from collaboration to command. It became clear to Hamilton that he was fighting an invisible war. Not against competitors on the track, but against a narrative machine designed to isolate him while pretending to uplift him. Ferrari had weaponized image over intent. Their focus wasn't on maximizing performance, it was on managing perception. And Hamilton, the greatest driver of his generation, had become a character in a story he no longer controlled. Still, he didn't explode. He didn't go public. He did what he had always done when cornered: he recalculated. He began creating his own data repository, requested duplicate sensors installed, recorded his own debriefs, took notes on engineer body language. Every meeting became a tactical observation. Every lap became a statement. And though the silence of those 37 seconds haunted him, he started using it. If they wanted him out of the loop, he'd loop around them. What Ferrari thought was isolation became fuel. And that's when something changed. His performance on track didn't just improve, it became defiant. Late braking overtakes. Tire gambles that paid off. Lap times that pushed the SF25 beyond its supposed limit. Crowds began to chant louder again. Pundits noticed the shift. Ferrari couldn't suppress the narrative anymore. Because Hamilton wasn't just driving a car, he was exposing a culture. And every success became a contradiction to the system trying to silence him. Inside Maranello, fractures widened. Meetings once controlled now spiraled into heated debates. Engineers began siding with Hamilton in subtle ways. Extra data here, timely radio cues there. The control that had been so carefully maintained began to slip. Not because of rebellion, but because truth, when driven lap after lap at full throttle, has a way of breaking through. Ferrari had wanted a symbol. What they got was a storm. And those 37 seconds? They weren't just silence. They were the start of something no one could mute. This isn't just a tale of mechanical errors or poorly timed tire changes. It's far more corrosive. Far more calculated. This is about what the world doesn't see on the broadcast feed or read in the race report. It's about invisible frameworks, hierarchies so deeply ingrained they don't need to be spoken aloud. It's about the illusion of fairness, about how equality can be paraded in public while favoritism thrives in shadows. This is about control. About internal power dynamics disguised as team spirit. It's about masks worn by those at the top, and how silence becomes a weapon just as dangerous as sabotage. From the moment the ink dried on Lewis Hamilton's contract with Ferrari, the headlines wrote themselves. The world exploded with imagery and prophecy. A night in crimson. The final chapter of a legendary career. A symbol of rebirth. The Italian press worshipped his arrival as divine intervention. Vogue spreads, primetime interviews, Netflix crews embedding into the paddock to document what was sold as the resurrection of the Scuderia. But beneath the surface, behind the romantic metaphors and curated interviews, a darker, more intricate operation was unfolding. And it had nothing to do with marketing, and everything to do with maintaining internal dominance. Frédéric Vasseur publicly stood at the podium and promised balance, harmony, mutual respect. Behind closed doors, however, those closest to the garage started noticing it. The subtle indicators that one side of the garage was more protected than the other. It wasn't overt. It didn't need to be. In Formula One, favoritism is never shouted. It's executed silently, surgically. Through data flow. Through resource allocation. Through how questions are answered, or not answered, during briefings. The favoritism didn't manifest in dramatic, camera-friendly ways. It was embedded in the foundations of the operation. Early test sessions revealed that Hamilton wasn't just struggling with unfamiliarity, he was being handed setups that defied logic. Configurations that didn't match his driving style. That worked against the very principles he'd spent 2 decades refining. It wasn't sabotage. It was something more insidious. It was obfuscation. Assigning him tasks that sounded important but delivered confusion. Giving him simulator sessions with untested variables and unpredictable parameters, while Leclerc ran optimal, race-ready simulations weeks ahead of schedule. Hamilton would walk into debriefs where his input was heard but not echoed. His questions would be received with nods, but not answers. He'd find himself reviewing telemetry that didn't match his actual run data. Subtle anomalies that could be chalked up to glitches but always seemed to pull him further from the car's true potential. And every time he voiced concern, the reply was the same: "We're still collecting comparative data." Comparative data. A phrase that sounds neutral, even scientific. But inside a Formula One team, it can be used to justify anything. Slower engine modes. Unreliable parts. Less efficient software patches. Because when you're testing, losing isn't failure, it's process. But only if it's one driver doing all the losing. And in those early months, Hamilton was constantly in that experimental purgatory, while Leclerc's corner of the garage functioned like a precision instrument. His programs were tailored. His team, sharp and aligned. His telemetry, consistent. His strategies, refined before they ever reached the track. It became obvious to those paying attention. Journalists started to whisper. Engineers from other teams raised eyebrows. Analysts noticed how Hamilton's onboards looked twitchier, how his car balance seemed inexplicably unpredictable session after session. Yet no one went on record. Because inside Ferrari, speaking up has consequences. Questioning the system isn't seen as constructive, it's interpreted as betrayal. So everyone watched. And waited. And whispered. What Hamilton faced wasn't just a technical disadvantage. It was psychological warfare. A slow drip of confusion meant to erode confidence. He knew it. He'd seen it before in other forms, at McLaren, in the early days at Mercedes. But here, it was different. More refined. More rehearsed. There were no angry emails or shouting matches. Just perfectly timed decisions that always seemed to put him one step behind. He was told it was coincidence. But coincidence doesn't happen this often. Not in Formula One. Even during race weekends, the differences continued. Briefings were split into compartments. Leclerc's team often had access to GPS overlays and predictive modeling that Hamilton's side received later, if at all. There were sessions where Hamilton discovered strategy changes moments before going out. Pit stop practices were scheduled when his engineers were double-booked with software updates. Weather data interpretations were filtered differently depending on which side of the garage you stood. And all of it fell under the guise of operational adjustments. Leclerc, for his part, didn't have to ask for any of this. That was the brilliance of it. The system was already designed to protect him. To elevate him. All he had to do was drive. And he did, smooth, fast, consistent. He said all the right things. Never once hinted that he saw the imbalance. Because he didn't need to. Everyone else did. Including Hamilton. And the deeper Hamilton went into this silent labyrinth, the clearer the picture became. He wasn't just racing the car. He was racing the institution itself. Racing against politics coded into performance data. Against allegiances wrapped in professionalism. Against a culture that had decided long before he arrived who the true heir to Ferrari's future was. But Lewis Hamilton is not a man who bows to structure. He bends it. Breaks it. He's done it before. And in his silence, in the way he studied every dataset, questioned every discrepancy, challenged every routine with surgical calm, he was already laying the groundwork for a counterattack. He wasn't looking to expose the system. He was preparing to beat it from within. To reclaim control not by asking for it, but by proving he didn't need their approval. Just his own execution. Because the story here isn't about favoritism. It's about resistance. About a 7-time world champion walking into enemy territory not with vengeance, but with vision. And every mile he drove, every compromised lap, every confusing briefing, he wasn't just surviving it. He was documenting it. Mapping it. Turning it into ammunition. Ferrari believed they could contain him with precision-built ambiguity. But what they underestimated was Hamilton's ability to weaponize isolation, to transform exclusion into motivation. And in a sport where milliseconds define greatness, that kind of fury, controlled, quiet, focused, is more dangerous than any upgrade ever engineered. Telemetry analysis from pre-season testing and private sessions began revealing layers of subtle manipulation that, at first glance, appear to be minor operational discrepancies. But Hamilton, a driver trained by years of political navigation and strategic warfare within elite teams, sensed it immediately. Something didn't align. The rhythm of development, the flow of technical focus, and the direction of resources weren't adding up, and it wasn't about pace or performance. It was about control. While Hamilton was being tasked with collecting data on experimental power unit mapping and long-range tire degradation models, data not immediately useful to his weekend performance, Leclerc was running ultralight setups. Engineers had quietly trimmed fuel levels, minimized ballast, and created the illusion of comparative pace by feeding Charles optimal conditions. To the untrained eye, it was all routine. But Lewis knew better. Every tenth matters. Every session builds narrative. And what the timing screens didn't show was how Ferrari had begun shaping a season-long storyline, one that favored Leclerc in nuance, not in declaration. Ferrari's technical meetings, once seen as a space of transparent collaboration, began to develop cracks. Hamilton's requests for specific simulator sessions, deep-dive explorations into brake modulation and mechanical grip variations tied to his driving DNA, were pushed to the side, deferred indefinitely. "It's on the list," they said. "We'll squeeze it in next week." That week never came. Meanwhile, Leclerc's preferences on high-speed aerobalance and DRS optimization were greenlit immediately, sometimes implemented within 24 hours. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was systemic. The moment that broke the illusion came not from radio chatter, not from a single denied setup tweak, but from a simple, devastating discovery. Hamilton was reviewing session data, doing what he had done for years, cross-referencing his telemetry against timing sectors, throttle traces, and tire deltas, when he realized that his cleanest laps, those near-perfect runs where everything clicked, weren't there. Not misfiled. Not buried. Just missing. Deleted from the debrief systems. No overlays. No comparative data. No feedback from engineers. And when he brought it up, the answers were hollow, deflective, rehearsed. That sector had GPS dropout. The system didn't capture that stint properly. "We'll escalate to IT." But there was no escalation. No correction. No urgency. Just silence. That's when it hit him, not like a crash, but like a slow, creeping realization that settles in the bones. He wasn't being neglected. He was being isolated. Not through confrontation, but through surgical detachment. A quiet exile masked as technical oversight. At first, he thought it might be growing pains. A new environment. A new leadership structure under Horner. Maybe it was the teething phase of integration. But the pattern persisted. In strategy briefings, his name would often come second, even in sessions built around his strengths. During post-race breakdowns, the emphasis would shift toward Charles's adaptability, his tire preservation, his sector improvements, rarely noting that Lewis had been assigned compromised tire strategies or longer initial stints on the harder compounds. It was subtle sabotage dressed up as balanced allocation. Inside the paddock, whispers began to spread. Journalists noticed Lewis's body language, the way he leaned away slightly in media scrums, the restraint in his tone. He wasn't blowing up. He was calculating, waiting, collecting. Because what was happening wasn't loud, it was efficient. There were no arguments over team radio. No outright refusal of parts. Just quiet redirection. Delayed upgrades. Data invisibility. Prioritization masked behind the veil of team-first initiatives. In the garage, even some mechanics began to feel the imbalance. Setup meetings ran longer on Leclerc's side. Tire blankets came off his car first. Radio checks happened earlier. And when Hamilton returned from runs, the post-stint analysis was brisk, shorter than usual, with fewer follow-up questions. A slow freeze. A marginalization so precise, so quiet, it could be denied at every level without leaving fingerprints. Horner, for all his experience, remained distant. Publicly, he praised both drivers equally. Internally, he focused on structure and process. But his silence on the growing gap was louder than any direct order. He didn't need to say it. Everyone understood. This wasn't about outright favoritism, it was about momentum. Leclerc was the long-term investment. The local hero. The driver who could grow into the face of a dynasty. Hamilton was the disruptor. The outsider. Brought in for shock and awe, for immediate transformation. But now, with the dust of the announcement settling, the machine began protecting its own. Hamilton's requests became sharper. More precise. He asked for hard data. Baseline comparisons. Sector overlays. But the answers came slower. The files arrived later. The updates were delayed. All under the guise of logistical complexity. Yet every delay fed the pattern, and the pattern fed the isolation. And then came the quiet conversations. A race strategist here, a telemetry engineer there, each one saying just enough to suggest they saw it too, without saying anything directly. Hints. Glances. Cautious acknowledgments. People afraid to speak plainly, but unwilling to pretend they didn't notice the imbalance. The culture had shifted. Ferrari wasn't outright excluding Hamilton. They were cushioning him inside a bubble, sterile, controlled, disconnected from the nucleus of performance decision-making. And still, Lewis stayed composed. No public meltdowns. No coded complaints. He played the game. He smiled in press conferences. He thanked the team. But every lap, every weekend, he gathered more than just lap times. He collected leverage. Because Lewis Hamilton doesn't implode. He calculates. He waits for the moment when the discrepancy can no longer be spun. When the results demand explanation. When the questions pile up faster than PR can clean them. And that moment is coming. It always comes. When data suppression backfires. When a supporting role driver suddenly outperforms the preferred narrative. Because you can bury telemetry. You can delay upgrades. But you can't hide a driver with the instincts of a predator and the patience of a surgeon. Lewis isn't looking to fight. He's looking to expose. And when he does, the system that tried to mute him will find itself drowning in the very silence it created. Inside the polished, cavernous corridors of Maranello, status is never openly declared, it's communicated in shadows. Ferrari doesn't need to tell you you're the number 2 driver. You feel it in ways too subtle to confront, yet too constant to ignore. It's embedded in the way your data is analyzed a beat slower, in the meetings where your name is left off the agenda, in the engineering briefings where your input is acknowledged with a nod but never acted upon. It's felt in the stillness that follows your feedback, an intentional pause that suggests your words hold less gravity. What corrodes your resolve isn't one catastrophic decision, but a sequence of minor, almost imperceptible cuts. The kind that don't bleed at first. The kind that accumulate. For Lewis Hamilton, it wasn't one act of betrayal that opened his eyes, it was the slow erosion of trust. The sprint win in China was supposed to be a turning point, a statement of intent, a reminder to the world that he still had fire in his veins and precision in every move. Instead, it passed through the team like a passing shower. The applause in the garage was half-hearted. The team radio offered a brief good job, before quickly pivoting to tire wear metrics. And then came the post-race bombshell, disqualification for a technical irregularity. Not once did Ferrari mount a defense that felt genuine. The public statements were hollow, the internal support non-existent. While the media storm flared, the team stood quiet, their silence louder than any condemnation. In that silence, something in Hamilton shifted. He didn't argue. He didn't confront. He didn't walk into Vasseur's office demanding answers or accountability. He didn't throw helmets or send fiery emails. He simply stood still, surrounded by the buzz of the paddock, and looked not at Leclerc, not at his car, but at the inner skeleton of Ferrari, the invisible system that had quietly sealed his ceiling before a single championship point had been scored. He saw the machine beneath the branding. The architecture of favoritism. The hierarchy that doesn't speak its truth aloud, but enforces it with action or inaction. Since that moment, Hamilton's approach has become clinical, almost mechanical. The fire's still there, but it burns differently. Not outward. Inward. Every race, every qualifying session, every debrief has become a scan, a code to crack. He's not just driving the car, he's analyzing the ecosystem, documenting its behaviors, its bias, its programmed reflexes. He doesn't treat Ferrari like a team anymore. He treats it like a riddle. A system of inputs and outputs he must outmaneuver. His radio messages have changed. They've grown colder, sharper, more clipped. Gone are the emotional responses, the personal touches, the bursts of energy. Now it's raw telemetry, lap deltas, tire status, brake temps. No banter. No bonding. A tone that says, I'm not here to belong. I'm here to uncover. When Hamilton asks for strategy clarification, the answers are vague. Conservative. Let's wait and see. Hold this pace. Think long-term. But when Leclerc finds himself in the same on-track situation, same tires, same conditions, the tone changes entirely. Push now. Go for the overtake. Target time is +3. The difference is surgical, clinical, and absolutely intentional. These are not stylistic differences between race engineers. These are signals. And Hamilton, for all his experience, for all his titles, doesn't miss signals. He hears the code. One driver is coached to conserve. The other is coached to conquer. One is told to endure. The other is told to attack. These aren't motivational differences, they're strategic assignments, issued subtly through radio commands, telemetry preferences, and race day positioning. They're not accidents. They're the language of prioritization. In team meetings, the imbalance continues. Leclerc's feedback is discussed, debated, diagrammed. Hamilton's is nodded at, noted, and never revisited. Technical developments are often routed through Leclerc's side of the garage first. New wing configurations, suspension updates, ERS deployment tweaks. Hamilton receives the upgrades only when they've been validated by someone else's data. He's the test subject only when it's convenient, never when it's risky. The favoritism doesn't wear team colors, it wears timing sheets, pit strategies, and garage focus. And still, Hamilton doesn't complain. That's not his weapon. His retaliation is data, precision, relentlessness. He's begun to adjust his racing line not just for speed, but for visibility, forcing camera angles to capture what the team tries to keep quiet. His passes are timed for broadcast. His tire management is designed to defy expectations. He's turning every lap into a message: you underestimated the wrong man. He's racing with the awareness of someone who knows he's being managed, controlled, edged out, but refuses to make it easy for them. Behind the scenes, the whispers are growing. Mechanics exchange glances. Engineers close laptops a little faster when he walks in. Even some inside the garage, those who still believe in fairness, have begun to break ranks. Notes are being shared. Patterns are being recorded. People are watching, and Hamilton knows it. He's not waiting for justice. He's documenting everything for the moment when silence is no longer possible. He has stopped trying to be embraced by the team. Now, he's studying it, measuring the gap between potential and politics. And while the team tries to frame his reserved behavior as detachment, what they fail to see is that he's more focused than ever, not on beating Leclerc, but on exposing the system that protects him. And in doing so, he's building something far more powerful than trust, leverage. Because one day, the silence will break. And when it does, Hamilton won't need to scream. He'll just show the receipts. Every coded message. Every strategy shift. Every race where he was told to hold while another was told to fly. Ferrari will claim it was parity. He'll prove it was preference. And the sport, the world, the fans, they'll see it too. Until then, he drives. Not for them. Not for the badge. But for something bigger. For vindication. For truth. For the undeniable moment where the telemetry lines up with the truth he's been living all season. And when that moment comes, there will be no need for words. The lap times will say it all. Insiders no longer whisper, they confirm. What once lived in rumor has evolved into something far more sophisticated, embedded deep within Ferrari's operational philosophy. The manipulation is no longer crude or obvious. It's woven seamlessly into the system. The vocabulary has changed. Orders no longer sound like commands. They've been masked with elegant euphemisms, rehearsed over months, codified into patterns that seem routine on the surface but carry devastating weight in execution. This isn't team strategy. This is tactical misdirection. This is orchestration without fingerprints. The shift isn't verbal. It's mechanical. It's encoded in data that only a handful of eyes ever see. Adjustments to brake bias aren't announced. They're recommended during harmless-sounding debriefs, wrapped in language about fuel load or degradation response. A suggestion to shift differential settings mid-corner. A revised timing cue for pit entry that adds half a second without question. Tire pressures calibrated not to fail, but to fall just below optimal operating windows. Not so off as to arouse suspicion, but enough to derail a race pace. Enough to ruin qualifying by a fraction. It's not sabotage. It's precision disruption. Invisible, deniable, devastating. And it began showing its hand after China. Lewis Hamilton, a driver who has spent his career deciphering balance through instinct and data alike, began noticing a pattern, one that couldn't be explained by setup flaws or driver error. Inputs that previously translated into flawless exits now triggered rear-end slides. Corner exits were no longer predictable. Telemetry flagged irregularities. But when he raised the inconsistencies, the responses came layered in politeness. Shrugged shoulders. Gentle deflections. Promises to look into it. The answers were always delayed, diluted, or quietly buried under new instructions. At first, Hamilton watched. Then, he started asking his own questions. He didn't argue. He investigated. Quietly. Systematically. He reached back through his own network. People who didn't wear red but still carried the silver of Mercedes in their blood. Engineers he trusted. Analysts who had once crafted machines around his driving DNA. He began sharing files. Isolated incidents became datasets. Lap deltas were tracked, compared, cross-referenced against performance simulations. Things that should have been anomalies were happening repeatedly. He started building something Ferrari couldn't erase. Not a complaint. Not a confrontation. A record. A meticulously assembled timeline of choices, omissions, deviations. Session after session, week after week, he documented shifts in vehicle behavior. Pit radio suggestions that led to loss of position. Setup alterations made at the last minute without full consultation. Software patches installed just before FP3. He didn't accuse. He simply archived. And with each entry, the leverage grew. Because Hamilton understands something few drivers ever will. His strength has never been submission. His career wasn't built on silent obedience. He's not afraid to lose a seat if the cost is silence. He doesn't operate on fear. He operates on timing. And Ferrari, an empire obsessed with controlling its image, preserving its mythos, maintaining the illusion of unity, knows the danger isn't what Hamilton threatens to say. It's what he can show. One screenshot. One line of data. One clipped exchange with an engineer who's had enough. That's all it would take. Inside Ferrari, the anxiety is growing. Meetings are longer. Voices are sharper. Discussions that once focused on strategy have pivoted toward containment. Damage control. The upper management walks a tightrope. Pretend nothing's wrong, or acknowledge the cracks and risk it all falling apart. Every team member is suddenly cautious. Phrases are rehearsed. Feedback is sanitized. Even the drivers are being briefed on how to answer the press without igniting speculation. But it's already too late. The panic has slipped into the bloodstream. Hamilton doesn't need a microphone. He doesn't need a press conference. He knows how to play this game in the shadows. And now, everything is a weapon. Every overlooked radio call. Every camera angle where something subtle went wrong. Every fan with an eye for discrepancies is watching. Every journalist who senses a rift is digging. Every rival team is sniffing around for confirmation. And the paddock knows, when Hamilton is this quiet, it's because the story he's about to tell will be impossible to ignore. Ferrari hoped to shape the narrative, to control every pixel of the picture. But they forgot that Lewis Hamilton doesn't follow scripts. He writes them. And the one he's writing now doesn't end with a podium, it ends with exposure. With headlines that rip through the illusion of harmony. With legacy-level fallout. He doesn't have to prove intent. He only has to prove inconsistency. The data speaks louder than any accusation. Ferrari now finds itself balancing on a razor's edge. Admit nothing and pray the storm passes, or address it and risk validation of everything whispered behind closed doors. They've spent years building an image of equality, of progress, of unity within the garage. But if Hamilton pulls the curtain back, even slightly, and reveals just how choreographed the imbalance has been, how deeply the manipulation runs, no apology will suffice. No PR statement will undo the damage. And the threat isn't in volume, it's in precision. Hamilton doesn't need noise. He needs timing. One leak. One internal document. One analytics chart highlighting the discrepancy between what he was told and what was actually delivered. He's waiting. Watching. Letting them walk closer to the edge. Because when he decides to speak, when he decides to act, it won't just shake the paddock. It will fracture the foundation of Ferrari's entire narrative. And once that fracture is visible, it will spread. Relentlessly. Irreversibly. At Imola, the truth wasn't whispered, it was screamed in silence. Every frame told a different story for each side of the garage. Leclerc, Ferrari's golden cornerstone, was surrounded by motion, constant radio messages, live delta adjustments, real-time strategy feedback. Encouragement. Attention. Concern. It was a cockpit wrapped in communication. Engineers responded to every micro-shift, every sector change, adapting and recalibrating with nervous precision. Meanwhile, across the garage, Lewis Hamilton sat in a different world, one stripped of noise, stripped of engagement. His radio? A ghost channel. No response to his input. No alterations mid-race. No warnings about tire drop-off. No tactical insight as track evolution shifted. There wasn't just distance, there was disconnect. He wasn't ignored by mistake. He was being left to drift. But he didn't drift. He endured. He didn't rage. He recorded. And with every lap he turned, he wasn't simply driving, he was documenting. Observing. Analyzing the cracks, registering the micro-betrayals, committing every lapse to memory. Not because he believes in their plan. Because he now understands exactly how this game is being played. He sees the subtle isolation, the calibrated indifference, the careful cold shoulder dressed up as team unity. He sees the storyline they're building around him, and he's not fighting it with emotion. He's responding with calculation. Outside the car, the change is even more chilling. His expressions? Gone are the playful smirks, the casual optimism, the hopeful energy that once accompanied him through the paddock. What's left is a man who watches everything and says nothing. His walk through the hospitality area is no longer a stroll, it's a mission. He doesn't interact, he scans. His eyes don't just look, they measure. Every question from the press is deflected with deliberate brevity. Every soundbite is sharpened into something cold, controlled, dangerous. Hamilton has become ice with a pulse. The early season camaraderie has evaporated, replaced by a hyper-aware predator biding his time in a place that doesn't realize it has already triggered a response it won't be able to contain. Ferrari, in their naivety, thought they were writing a fairy tale. They imagined Hamilton as a ceremonial figure, an aging knight to lend glamour to Leclerc's coronation. A mentor. A mascot. A legacy tool. They didn't expect a scalpel. They didn't anticipate that behind the trophies and the fanfare lived a mind wired for warfare. They underestimated the force of nature they invited into their house. They mistook silence for submission, patience for passivity. And now they're learning, slowly painfully, that Lewis Hamilton is not the past. He is the reckoning. They brought him in to frame Leclerc, to make the young prince look brighter by comparison, to borrow Hamilton's glory and transfer it by proximity. But glory doesn't transfer. And Hamilton doesn't fade. He adapts. He absorbs the storm. He learns the terrain. And when he moves, he doesn't just retaliate. He deconstructs. Quietly. Brilliantly. Absolutely. Because Hamilton's greatest weapon was never just his pace. It was his memory. His ability to endure humiliation without forgetting it. His skill at storing every insult, every condescending gesture, every false promise. His mind doesn't discard betrayal. It archives it. Files it. Categorizes it for later use. And now, every race is a document. Every debrief is a data point. Every smirk from the pit wall, every team order, every lopsided strategy call, it's all being fed into the machine of his revenge. The media doesn't see it yet. They ask if he's lost his edge. If he's finally slowing down. If the fire has gone out. But they're looking in the wrong place. The fire isn't gone. It's been moved, redirected into something colder, more efficient, more precise. This isn't anger. It's architecture. He's building something. Quietly. Lethally. And when it's ready, it won't come with fury. It will arrive with finality. Because when Hamilton decides to strike, it won't be a reaction. It will be a plan years in the making. He no longer asks for answers. He no longer seeks clarity. He no longer plays into the performance of teamwork when he knows the backstage script is already written without him. He isn't trying to belong anymore. He's planning an exit that will make the ground shake. Not to run. To leave with power. To detonate, not depart. The whispers in the paddock will grow louder. The subtle tension between Hamilton's side of the garage and Leclerc's will become harder to mask. The post-race interviews will grow more cryptic. The pit wall dynamics will fracture under the pressure of Hamilton's awareness. And all the while, he'll keep smiling in that calm, terrifying way he does when he knows something others don't. He knows they made the wrong calculation. He knows they thought time had dulled his edge. He knows they believed they could manage him. But they didn't bring in a fading legend. They invited in a weapon with a conscience. A strategist with a purpose. A lion that no longer wants the cage, or the crown. He wants the system. He wants control over what controls everything else. And once he has that, titles will just be side effects. Accolades will be collateral. Imola wasn't just another Grand Prix. It was the start of something the cameras didn't catch. Something that won't be evident in the standings, but in the tension that now coils around the Ferrari garage like a storm preparing to strike. The lion is not asleep. He is not caged. He is simply watching. Waiting. Tracking the patterns, noting the weaknesses, anticipating the next move before they make it. And when the time comes, when he finally chooses to unleash what he's been quietly building, it won't be a headline, it'll be a warning. Not to Ferrari. To everyone. Because the man they tried to contain doesn't just return. He redefines. And when he decides to collapse the walls, it won't be with noise. It'll be with silence so sharp it cuts everything in its path.